The War of the Fallen Angels. The sky burns. The night sky split open with a terrible scream. Blinding fire rained down from the heavens, turning darkness into a golden inferno. The air itself trembled as massive figures descended, their bodies wreathed in divine flames. They had wings like molten steel, eyes burning with celestial fury. The ground shook beneath their arrival. Missiles soared toward them, leaving trails of smoke, but before they could hit, they disintegrated into dust. Fighter jets crumbled midair, their pilots screaming in confusion before vanishing into thin air. Tanks melted where they stood, the greatest armies of Earth, powerless. Panic spread through the cities. People ran through the streets, searching for shelter, but there was none. The invaders walked among them, their towering forms untouched by bullets. With a single touch, they pulled souls from bodies, leaving behind only lifeless husks. No mercy, no explanation. In the chaos, the world's leaders tried to respond. The President of the United States was addressing the world when his body stiffened. His eyes rolled back. Then, in front of millions watching live, he disappeared, leaving only his empty suit behind. Across the globe, the same fate befell kings, presidents, generals, gone in an instant. The world had no one left to lead. In the following hours, survivors whispered a single name. It spread like wildfire through terrified voices: the fallen. Ancient texts spoke of them, warriors once loyal to the heavens, cast out for their defiance. But those were myths, legends told to scare children. Now, they were real, and they had returned to claim Earth. The lone priest, standing amidst the ruins of his church, looked up at the burning sky and fell to his knees. "They have come for judgment," he whispered. He was right. This was not an invasion. It was not war. It was something far worse. It was divine punishment. As cities crumbled, not all of humanity surrendered. In the deepest tunnels beneath the earth, a resistance formed. Soldiers, scientists, and those who refused to bow gathered, desperate to find a way to fight back. But how could mortals stand against creatures that turned weapons to dust with a mere thought? "We need to understand them," said General Harris, leader of the underground resistance. His face was lined with age, his eyes hardened by war. "Find their weakness. Every enemy has one." A young scientist, Dr. Emily Carter, hesitated before speaking. "There are ancient stories of celestial shards, artifacts left behind by the first war in the heavens. They were said to be powerful enough to wound even the strongest of angels." Harris narrowed his eyes. "You believe in fairy tales. Do you have a better idea?" Emily shot back. "The fallen aren't bound by human laws. They exist beyond science. If we want to fight them, we need something just as powerful." Silence filled the underground base. Then Harris nodded. "Find them." On the surface, Earth continued to burn. Cities once full of life were now hollow ruins, their streets littered with the remains of those judged unworthy. Among the destruction, a young boy, no older than 12, clutched his little sister's hand. Their parents were gone, their home nothing but ash. The boy pulled her into a broken subway station, their only refuge. She sobbed against his chest, her small fingers digging into his shirt. "I'm scared," she whispered. He held her tighter, whispering, "I won't let them take us." Above them, the sky cracked again. A new presence emerged, even more terrifying than the ones before. The heavens seemed to bow as it approached. The air grew heavy. Gravity shifted. Those who still stood fell to their knees, their bodies unable to bear the pressure. From the swirling storm of fire and light, a figure descended, larger than any before, its wings stretching across the horizon. Its voice was not a sound, but a force that vibrated through every living soul. "Kneel." The command was absolute, unquestionable. Those who resisted clutched their heads in agony, their bodies trembling. Even the fallen lowered themselves before the new arrival. Deep in the underground base, alarms blared. Emily and Harris looked at the monitors, their screens flickering as the entity's presence distorted reality itself. Emily's breath caught. That's not just another fallen. Harris swallowed hard. Then what is it? She turned to him, her face pale. Their leader. Above, the massive being extended a hand toward the ruined earth. Its burning eyes scanned the planet, its gaze stripping away all pretense of strength. Your time is over. And then, the world shook once more. The prophecy of doom. The tunnels trembled as distant explosions echoed through the underground resistance base. Dim lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the stone walls. The resistance fighters huddled around a massive dust-covered tome placed on an ancient wooden table. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink barely legible, yet the words carried an undeniable weight. Before the first kingdom, before the first throne, the war of the heavens shall carve the fate of the last mortal king. He alone shall bear the celestial shards against the fallen. Commander Elias ran a hand through his graying hair, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the scholars, soldiers, and scientists gathered before him. The last mortal king died centuries ago, he said, voice heavy with doubt. So tell me, what does this prophecy mean? Dr. Helena Graves, the leading historian, adjusted her glasses. If this text is to be believed, then the war we fight is not new. It was foretold before humanity even existed. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, Captain Wren, a hardened warrior with battle scars across his arms, scoffed. Stories and myths won't save us. We need weapons, not riddles. Dr. Graves ignored him and continued. The celestial shards. We don't know what they are. But according to legends, they were gifts from the heavens, weapons forged from divine power. If they exist, they might be the only thing capable of stopping the fallen. Elias leaned forward. And how do we find them? We don't even know if they're real. A young scientist, Amir, interjected. Even if they were, they could be lost to time. Another scholar spoke up. The prophecy hints at something even more concerning. It speaks of the last mortal king. If that king is truly gone, then who is meant to wield the shards? A heavy silence fell upon the room. Before they could debate further, the emergency sirens wailed. A transmission crackled through the speakers, a voice, deep and commanding, filled with unearthly authority. I am Seraphiel, the first betrayer, the voice declared. You believe this war is between humanity and the fallen, but you are mistaken. This war is against the gods themselves. Static buzzed. Then the holographic display flickered to life, revealing a figure cloaked in black armor, his eyes burning with silver fire. The gods abandoned you, Seraphiel continued. They created you as an afterthought, while we were cast from grace. Now, the time has come for retribution. Gasps rippled through the room. The leader of the fallen was no mindless destroyer. He was once a divine being, one who had turned against the heavens themselves. Before they could process the revelation, an old priest, Father Alric, stepped forward. His face was pale. There is one more thing, he whispered. There is a secret the church has kept for centuries. A bloodline, one that carries both the essence of heaven and earth. Elias narrowed his eyes. What are you saying? Alric swallowed. There may be a human among us, who is not entirely human. One who could change the course of this war. The room erupted into chaos. Who was this person? Did they even exist? And if they did, would they stand with humanity, or would they become another fallen? Before the questions could be answered, the lights flickered violently. A deep, metallic groan echoed through the tunnels. The walls trembled. The sanctuary's defenses were impenetrable. At least, they were supposed to be. But now, the alarms blared as security doors were overridden. Screens displayed live footage of guards collapsing, one by one. Their throats slit before they could react. Impossible, Wren muttered, gripping his weapon. Someone let them in, Elias growled. His heart pounded. We've been betrayed. Before they could react, The doors to the war room burst open. A hooded figure stood at the entrance, blade dripping with blood, eyes glowing with unnatural light. The resistance had been breached, and the enemy was already inside. The traitor's bargain. The city was burning. Screams filled the air as buildings crumbled into the abyss below. The ground had split open, revealing an endless chasm of writhing fire and shadow. From the depths, twisted horrors crawled forth, their bodies shifting between flesh and smoke. General Elias barely managed to hold the line. His soldiers, already exhausted from days of relentless battles, fired desperately at the creatures. Energy bolts and explosives tore through the demonic horde, but for every abomination that fell, 3 more emerged. Then came the moment that shattered everything. From atop a ruined tower, a single figure watched the devastation unfold. He was not a demon. He was human, and he was smiling. Commander Soren, Elias gasped, realization sinking in like a knife to the heart. You betrayed us. Soren's face was calm, almost serene. It's not betrayal, Elias. It's survival. Before Elias could react, Soren raised a small, dark crystal in his hand. The artifact pulsed with unnatural energy, and suddenly, the hellish chasm widened. Entire city blocks collapsed into the infernal abyss, taking millions of people with them. The screams were deafening. Then silence. Only fire remained. The resistance barely escaped the catastrophe. Elias, bruised and bloodied, led what remained of his forces deep into the underground tunnels. The loss of the city was a blow that left them staggering, but there was no time to grieve. The enemy had won a decisive battle, and now they knew the truth. The celestial shards were real. These ancient relics, said to be the only weapons capable of sealing the Hellgate forever, had long been dismissed as myths. But now, the fallen knew about them, and they would stop at nothing to claim them first. The resistance had no choice. They had to act before the enemy did. Their next destination, the ruins of Eldoria, where the first shard was rumored to be hidden. The journey was perilous. The ruins lay beyond the ashen wastes, a lifeless stretch of land where the sky was permanently scorched black. They moved in silence, avoiding the patrols of the fallen who now scoured the world for the same prize. Elias kept his soldiers moving. His mind, however, was elsewhere. Soren. He had trusted him. They all had. How long had Soren been working with the fallen? What had they promised him? Immortality? Power? No answer would justify the lives lost. Elias clenched his fists. If they survived this war, he would make Soren pay. The ruins loomed ahead like skeletal remains of a forgotten age. The moment they entered, an unnatural chill settled over them. The air was thick with whispers, soft, distant voices that seemed to slither around them like unseen serpents. Some of the soldiers hesitated, gripping their weapons tighter. "Stay close," Elias ordered. "No one wanders off." They navigated through crumbling archways and broken statues, searching for any sign of the celestial shard. It was supposed to be buried deep beneath the temple's central chamber. The deeper they went, the stronger the whispers became. Then they saw it, a pedestal standing in the center of a vast ancient hall. And upon it, a blade-like crystal, glowing with an ethereal light, the first celestial shard. Elias stepped forward cautiously. There was no sign of the fallen yet, but something felt wrong. His instincts screamed at him to wait, but before he could stop him, one of the soldiers, a young recruit named Dane, rushed forward. "Dane, stop!" But it was too late. The moment Dane's fingers brushed the shard, his body arched backward. His eyes glowed with a searing white light, his mouth open in a silent scream. The ground trembled, and a deafening roar filled the chamber. Something else was already here. The walls cracked. Shadows blowed from the cracks, forming into towering figures with burning eyes. They were not demons. They were something older, something worse. And now, they were awake. Ascension or corruption? The shard pulsed with an eerie glow, its power coursing through Commander Elias like liquid fire. He stood in the dimly lit chamber, his breath heavy. The underground resistance base trembled as distant explosions rumbled through the earth. Outside, the war raged, but within him, another battle had begun. The voice whispered, soft, insidious. "You are chosen. Embrace your destiny." Elias clenched his fists. Ever since he wielded the fallen shard, his strength had grown beyond human limits. He could tear through armored foes, see in the dark, and move faster than any soldier. But the voice, it was growing louder. He saw visions now. The fallen, those celestial beings that waged war against humanity, were once something else. Protectors, guardians. Their golden wings had not always been stained with blood. "You can't seriously think of using these shards." Sergeant Cole slammed his fist on the war table. His face was lined with exhaustion, his eyes filled with worry. "It's corrupting you, Elias. You don't even sleep anymore." "We need every weapon we can get," Captain Mira argued. "If we don't use the shards, we lose." The resistance was fracturing. One side saw the shards as salvation. The other feared them as a trap. Elias stood in the middle, his mind warring with itself. "The fallen are not invincible," he said at last. "We have a chance, but we can't fight them with brute force alone. We need to strike at their core." He pointed to the holographic map. "Here, the Soul Forge." Gasps filled the chamber. The Soul Forge was a nightmare, a device that turned captured humans into mindless thralls, celestial soldiers with no will of their own. "If we destroy it, we stop their army from growing," Elias said. "We cut off their reinforcements. We give humanity a chance." It was a suicide mission. No one said it, but the silence was heavy with the thought. The team moved under the cover of darkness, slipping through the ruins of the old city. The sky was split with unnatural storms, the air humming with unseen energy. The closer they got to the Fallen's fortress, the stronger Elias felt the shards pull. "Your enemies are weak. Take your rightful place." He shook off the voice. Focus. The mission was all that mattered. Reaching the fortress, they saw it, a towering monolith of black stone, surrounded by floating sentinels. A single entrance, heavily guarded. No time for stealth. They had to move fast. "Go!" Elias roared. Gunfire erupted. Explosions lit the sky. Elias tore through the enemy, his strength unnatural, his movements fluid. He felt unstoppable. Inside the fortress, the air reeked of burnt flesh. Cages lined the walls, filled with half-transformed prisoners, humans with vacant eyes, wings beginning to sprout from their backs. The Soul Forge stood at the center, a pulsating core of pure energy. Mira and Cole planted explosives while Elias covered them. But something was wrong. The shard burned in his grip. Visions filled his mind. A golden city, a fallen angel kneeling before a celestial throne. A name echoed in his skull. Seraphiel, the name of the fallen general, the enemy's greatest warrior. His weakness. The knowledge came with unbearable pain. Elias screamed, clutching his head. Shadows crawled at the edges of his vision. The voice in his mind laughed. "You were never meant to wield it," a cold voice said. Elias turned. A fallen warrior stood before him, eyes burning with ethereal fire. "You have seen the truth. Now you will join us." The battle raged, but Elias no longer saw his comrades. He saw only the past, the memories forced into his mind by the shard. The fallen had once been protectors, but something twisted them, something darker than humanity could understand. He staggered, his body betraying him. The whispers became screams. Mira grabbed him. "Elias, snap out of it. We have to go." The charges were set. The Soul Forge trembled, its power surging wildly. Cole fired his weapon, covering their retreat. "Blow it now." With a final burst of energy, The explosives detonated, fire consumed the forge, and the captured humans let out one final, haunting cry before the fortress collapsed. The resistance barely escaped. But Elias, he was no longer himself. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The shard's whispers became a single name, repeated over and over. Seraphiel, Seraphiel, Seraphiel. The others watched in horror as Elias's eyes glowed with an unnatural light. The power had changed him. Had they won a victory, or had they just created a new monster? The war was far from over. And now, the enemy had a new piece in play. Elias looked up, his voice barely a whisper. I know how to kill Seraphiel. The resistance members stared at him, uncertain whether they should feel relief or fear. The angels fall. The battlefield was not of earth, nor of heaven. It was a place in between, where light and darkness clashed, and where destiny was about to be rewritten. Seraphiel stood upon the ruined city, his golden armor still shining, but his once unshakable resolve flickering like a dying flame. Below him, the remnants of humanity fought desperately against the horrors that had come from the depths of the abyss. The fallen, those who had turned against heaven, were no longer their enemies. They were now something else. Allies by necessity, bound by a shared will to survive. The plan had been set. Humanity had discovered a weakness, something hidden deep within Seraphiel's past, something even he had forgotten. But the fallen knew. And now, as the war raged, so did the conflict inside the great archangel's heart. A deep rumble echoed across the sky. The heavens themselves seemed to wail as a great storm gathered above. The light of the sun faded, swallowed by a thick, unnatural darkness. Then they came. The Archons. They descended in blinding pillars of light, their wings stretching wide like celestial banners of war. Clad in silver and gold, their faces were hidden beneath featureless helms. They were not here to negotiate. They were not here to judge. They had come to annihilate all who stood in defiance of divine will, humans and fallen alike. Seraphiel felt his chest tighten. He had once been one of them. No, more than that. He had led them. Seraphiel, a voice boomed from the heavens. Your mission is incomplete. Humanity must be judged. The fallen must be purged. Step aside and fulfill your duty. The angel did not move. He gripped his great sword tightly, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. Below he saw the humans, bloodied, desperate, yet still fighting. He saw the fallen, creatures once full of arrogance, now fighting side by side with the mortals they once despised. And for the first time in eons, he hesitated. You are hesitating. The voice spoke again, now closer. The lead Archon, clad in blinding white armor, landed before Seraphiel. You doubt your purpose, but doubt is weakness. Have you fallen, Seraphiel? Seraphiel remained silent. He turned his gaze toward the battlefield again, watching as a human soldier was struck down by a beast from the abyss, only for a fallen warrior to pull him to safety. He watched a young woman, face smeared with blood and dirt, lift a broken sword against a creature far beyond her power. They were still fighting. Even when their end seemed certain, they'd fought. They do not deserve this fate, Seraphiel finally spoke. You do not decide who deserves judgment, the Archon said, his voice cold and absolute. You are not God. Seraphiel's grip on his sword tightened. Perhaps not, he said, but I can still choose. The sky cracked with thunder. The Archons raised their weapons. And Seraphiel did the unthinkable. With a single swing of his blade, Seraphiel struck down the lead Archon. The battlefield froze. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The other Archons recoiled in shock. The fallen stared in disbelief. And the humans, caught in the middle, could only watch in horror as a celestial war erupted before their very eyes. The Archons attacked without mercy, their divine energy tearing through the battlefield like fire through dry grass. The fallen, realizing they would not be spared, fought back with all they had. Humanity, now caught between the warring sides, struggled to survive. Seraphiel stood at the center of it all, battling his own brothers and sisters, angels who had once fought by his side. Their strikes were relentless, but he countered them with equal force, his golden sword clashing against their divine blades. He did not fight for victory. He fought for choice. He fought for humanity. And he fought for himself. The battle raged on, the skies burning with celestial fire. The ground trembled under the weight of divine fury. But something else was happening. Something deeper. Seraphiel felt it within him, a fracture in his very being. By striking against the Archons, he had sealed his fate. A sharp pain shot through his wings. He stumbled, gasping, as his once radiant feathers darkened. His armor, once golden, was beginning to crack. The punishment for betrayal had begun. He was falling. Seraphiel knew he could not win this war alone. His strength was fading, but his will remained. He turned to the humans, to the fallen, and he spoke with a voice that shook the heavens. Fight, not for survival, but for the right to exist. This is your world. Stand and claim it. His words ignited something in them. The humans, battered and broken, found new strength. The fallen, long cast aside, now had a purpose beyond mere rebellion. And together, they charged. The battlefield became a storm of steel and fire, of screams and fury. The Archons, once invincible, found themselves pushed back. For the first time in history, they wavered. And then, the heavens split open once more. A new light descended, far brighter, far more terrible than the Archons before it. It was not a warrior. It was something greater. Judgment itself had arrived. Seraphiel turned to face it, his breath shallow, his strength nearly gone. He had done the unthinkable. He had turned against heaven itself, and now he would face the consequences. But he did not regret it. As the blinding light consumed everything, a single thought crossed his mind. I was wrong before, but not now. And with that, the world was engulfed in light. The last mortal king. The battlefield was quiet, too quiet. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and blood. The last standing city on earth, a once great metropolis, now lay in ruins. Smoke rose from shattered buildings, casting long shadows over the resistance fighters as they gathered for what would be the final war. Seraphiel stood at the center of it all, his wings torn, his armor dented. He had once been heaven's greatest warrior, but now he was neither angel nor man, only a rogue fighting against both sides. Around him, humans, fallen angels, and rebels from both realms prepared for the inevitable clash. The celestial shards had been gathered, each piece humming with an ancient energy. Soon, they would reforge the blade of origin, the only weapon capable of destroying the Archons. But none of them expected what was about to happen next. A young boy stepped forward from the crowd, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He looked no older than 10, his small frame hidden beneath a simple tunic. Yet, as he moved, the air itself seemed to bend around him, as if the universe recognized his presence. "This is him," whispered an old seer among the rebels. The prophecy. It was true. Seraphiel narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" The boy looked up at the warrior angel, his voice calm but filled with authority. "I am the last mortal king." A murmur spread through the gathered forces. The last mortal king had been thought to be a great warrior, a hero who would lead humanity to salvation. But this boy, he was just a child. "How is this possible?" one of the resistance leaders muttered. "The blood of both divinity and humanity runs through his veins," the seer explained. "He has been hidden for generations, waiting for the right moment." Seraphiel knelt before the boy, searching for any sign of deception, but there was none. The child's presence alone was enough to shake the foundations of both heaven and hell. "We need to forge the blade," Seraphiel said, rising to his feet, "and we don't have much time." The celestial shards glowed as they were placed into the ancient forge. Fire erupted, but it was not ordinary fire. It was the very essence of creation itself. The air shimmered, and time seemed to slow as the metal melted and reshaped itself into a blade unlike any other. The sword pulsed with an otherworldly light. The blade of origin was reborn. Seraphiel grasped the hilt, feeling power surge through him. It was heavier than any weapon he had ever held, not in weight but in purpose. This was the key to ending the war, but there was something else, a hidden truth buried within its energy. The old seer gasped, "It's not meant to destroy." Everyone turned to her. She trembled, her eyes wide with revelation. The shards, they were never meant to bring death. They were meant to rewrite the laws of existence itself. A heavy silence followed. If true, then everything they had planned for the final battle would change. The war wasn't about who would win. It was about reshaping reality itself. The skies above the ruined city darkened. A deafening sound shook the earth as the forces of heaven and hell arrived. Angels descended with blazing swords, their golden wings shining like the sun. Demonic legions clawed their way through the burning ground, their monstrous forms twisting in the smoke. And at the center of it all, the archons stood, beings older than time itself, watching with cold, emotionless eyes. Seraphiel tightened his grip on the blade of origin. "This is it," he said. "No more running." With a battle cry, the resistance charged. The clash was unlike anything seen before. Divine energy clashed with hellfire. Humans, armed with both steel and magic, fought against impossible odds. The mortal king stood at the heart of it all, untouched by the chaos, his presence alone enough to shake the battlefield. Seraphiel cut through enemy lines, his blade slicing through celestial armor and demonic flesh alike. He fought his former brethren, knowing there was no turning back. The ground was painted with the blood of angels and demons alike. The archons, unmoved by the carnage, watched from above. One of them finally spoke, their voice echoing through the battlefield. "You cannot win," the archon declared. "Existence belongs to us." Seraphiel raised the blade of origin. "No," he said, "not anymore." With a single swing, the blade struck. Time stopped. The battlefield froze in place. The very fabric of reality trembled. A crack formed in the sky. No, not the sky, but in existence itself. Light and darkness swirled together, and for the first time, the archons showed something close to fear. The last mortal king stepped forward, placing a hand on the blade of origin. His voice, though quiet, echoed through every soul present. "We will not be your pawns anymore." The crack widened. The rules of existence, the laws that had governed heaven, hell, and earth for eternity, began to break. Seraphiel felt himself being pulled into the void. The war had changed. This was no longer a battle of armies. This was a battle for reality itself. And then, darkness, rebirth, or oblivion. The blade of eternity descended. As its edge neared the battlefield, time itself fractured. The roar of war, the cries of the dying, the clash of steel and fire, all froze in a single instant. The air shivered, the universe held its breath. The last mortal king stood alone, his armor cracked, his body bruised, yet his eyes burned with unyielding resolve. Before him, the archons hovered, beams of divine radiance, their celestial armor reflecting the dying light of a shattered world. Behind him, the fallen writhed, their twisted forms reaching out, shadows desperate to reclaim what was once theirs. The battlefield was a nightmare of broken wings and ruined hopes. And in that suspended moment, he understood. This was the choice written in fate, the decision that would shape eternity itself. Reset the war, or reshape reality. His grip on the blade tightened. He had fought, bled, and lost everything. The gods had played their games, using humanity as pawns in a war not of their making. Angels and demons alike had whispered their lies, promised salvation, threatened damnation. But now, for the first time, the power belonged to him. With a deep breath, he made his decision. The blade struck the heart of the battlefield. A pulse of energy erupted from its impact, surging outward like a tidal wave. The heavens trembled. The earth cracked. The very fabric of existence rippled as the power of the blade reshaped reality. The fallen screamed as their curse shattered. Their monstrous forms dissolved, the darkness that bound them vanishing into the void. But with them, the archons also faded. Their divine presence flickered, their celestial dominion undone. Heaven's grip on earth was broken. A great silence followed. For the first time in human history, no gods remained, no angels to watch over them, no demons to drive them into darkness, no higher powers to dictate their fate. Humanity stood alone. The last mortal king staggered back, feeling the weight of his decision settle upon his shoulders. The battlefield was empty now, the war erased. Cities that had crumbled were whole again. The sky, once torn apart by fire and shadow, was clear. Yet something was missing. He turned, searching the horizon, his heart pounding. Then he saw her, Seraphil. She stood at the edge of the void, her once radiant wings now fading embers. No longer an angel, nor a demon, just something in between. Their eyes met. "Is this freedom?" she whispered. He stepped closer, but the void pulled at her, dragging her into its endless depths. "Seraphil," he called out, reaching for her hand. She smiled, a sorrowful, knowing smile. "No gods, no kings, only humans remain. That is the world you have chosen." And then she was gone. The last mortal king stood alone at the edge of existence. He clenched his fists, his breath shaking. He had won the war. But at what cost? A whisper drifted through the wind. "We will return." His blood ran cold. He turned, scanning the sky. Above him, a crack remained, a jagged wound in reality itself. It pulsed faintly, as if struggling to close, but not entirely sealed. A storm was coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. The war was over, but the battle was not. The last mortal king exhaled and turned his back to the sky. Humanity was free. And now, they had to learn what that truly meant. The crack in the sky lingers, an unhealed scar of a war that should never have been. For now, silence reigns, but deep in the void, something stirs, and it waits.